For years, I've wanted to build my own gaming computer. Today, I've finally done it. Here is my new mid-tier gaming PC. At $1,300 Canadian or $1,000 USD, it balances gaming performance and affordability. The star players of this build include the affordable yet very well-performing Ryzen 5 5600 processor, the RX 6600 XT, which is one of the best graphics cards on the market in terms of price to performance, and an MSI B550 motherboard. The first step was to put my power supply into the case. Typically this is the last step, but I wanted to plug it in so I could periodically touch it and ground myself to protect against damaging any other parts with static. On the next step, I realized I didn't actually need to do that, and you'll see why. This 450 watt power supply from EVGA is very cheap, yet still good enough for me not to worry about it damaging any other parts. Now it's time to put everything on my motherboard. You can see that I've set it up on a grounded mat to protect against static, and this mat actually had an included grounding bracelet to make sure I didn't shock anything. That's why I didn't have to put the power supply in right away, but oh well. The first thing to go on my motherboard is the CPU. AMD CPUs are covered in tiny fragile pins on the bottom, and I was very worried about accidentally bending one and ruining the whole thing, but it all went smoothly. Putting in the CPU was very simple. All I had to do was lift up the locking lever on the motherboard, gently place down the CPU while letting gravity pull it into place, and then close the locking lever. The next thing to go on is the RAM. I'm using two 8GB sticks of 3600 MHz RAM, with RGB lighting of course. RAM is even easier to put in. All you need to do is push back the locking tabs, line up a little notch in the bottom of the sticks with one in the motherboard, and push it in until the tab clicks back out. Now it's time for storage. I'm using a 1TB SSD, which will give me plenty of storage for all my games. Installing it is as simple as removing the cover from my motherboard, putting the SSD into its slot, and then screwing it securely into place. Then I remove the plastic film from the bottom of the cover and put it back on. The last part to go on before I put the motherboard into the case is the CPU cooler. Here I'm applying thermal paste, which is a necessary solution to help with heat transfer. The first time I put the cooler on, it didn't actually fit. I was really worried and took it off, cleaned all the thermal paste out with some rubbing alcohol, and did some googling. Turns out, when I was assembling the cooler, I accidentally put the brackets on the wrong side, so the holes didn't match up with the ones on the motherboard. It was an easy fix, and I got it on the second try. I applied new thermal paste, screwed down the radiator, and then attached the fan to it and plugged it in. The screws were a little hard to get in, as they are spring-loaded and you have to put a lot of force into them. I was really worried about breaking my motherboard, but luckily that didn't happen. Now it's time to put the completed motherboard into my case. I put my case down on its side, then carefully lowered my motherboard in, lining up all the screw holes with the pre-installed standoffs in the case. Then I screwed them in, and here it was really handy to have a magnetic tip screwdriver. Then I stood my case up again and put in the final and most expensive piece, the graphics card. This was really easy too, as all I had to do was push in the locking tab, slowly line it up to the slot on the motherboard, and slide it in until the tab clicked out again. I then screwed in the side, which wasn't necessary for my light graphics card, but I had extra screws and it adds peace of mind. The build was nearly complete. After some wiring and tidying up, it was all finished, and it looks great.